always feel like the eagle has landed when that thing arrives. It's such a triumphant
Absolutely.
thing. And then it's just us two standing here. I mean, it's great to have you here, Noel. But
Thank
people
you.
are so used to my rambling on the internet. So, how are you doing? Did you have a good week since we last
I
saw each
had,
other?
yeah, I did. I had a great week, Zev. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me back. Looking forward to tonight.
I love having you on the show. You're always full of such great insight. Last week was just really fascinating, and tonight we're going to be doing something really interesting. There's a friend of mine that we've been talking for over a year now, I think, online about his ideas about what is going on with the world right now. They're mind-blowing ideas that will change everything that you've probably thought up until tonight. From this day forward, it'll be very, very different. We're going to go step by step with this guy because he's that kind of brilliant. Originally a violinist at a very young age, a child prodigy. At 4 years old, he started playing violin and then
It's amazing.
became a virtuoso violinist, traveled around the world, mostly in the gospel world, but also otherwise, doing incredible travel and performances. Sold 350,000 albums. But that's not why we're talking to him tonight. We're talking to him tonight because as he was traveling around the world, he figured out something really special about how the world operates, like the real secret for what happens in the world. So he's going to explain that to us in about 10 minutes from now. I should warn you that there is all sorts of banging going on upstairs because of some sort of construction. So if you hear that, I apologize. It just happens from time to time on these shows. And I don't know them, so I don't know if I can go and knock on their door and say, hey, you guys, don't do that. And the reason we're talking to David tonight particularly is because we're going to be doing something about the crown. Did you like that?
That's awesome.
The crown. And by what do I mean by that? What am I talking about when I talk about the crowns in the crown? One more time, because it's so special. Okay, so why am I talking about cracks in the crown? There is a movement in the world, there's a thing that's changing, and that is probably the most powerful human in the world, or one of the most powerful human in the world is about to change. I mean, we've had the Queen as the head of the British Empire for a while now. Her husband is no longer with us, and it's, almost time, one would think, for Prince Charles to assume the throne. That is normally just considered one of these things that just maybe happens, But if you really think about how powerful the throne really is and how powerful the queen or the king are, then you realize that we're in for fundamental shifts in the way we see the world. And we'll be talking to David about why that is the case. He's got a keen interest in anthropology and understanding how the world has developed. And he'll bring us into a different headspace, into how powerful the king and the queen of Britain in particular, but all kings and queens are powerful. Any thoughts about the kings and the queens of the world? You're not a royal, are you? Secretly masquerading as? Maybe you are. I don't know.
I'm not a royalist, as they say. I know some, and some big fans of The Crown. I'm a fan of the Netflix series, certainly the BBC series. I've met some of them. I've met Prince Harry. I've done events with him. He struck me as a pretty decent kid, and I'm friends with Ella Windsor. And for full disclosure, I've hung out with her in London and stuff. I used to spend a lot of time over there. But
who's she? Sorry,
she's the. Her mother is a sister. She's a Windsor. She's Ella Windsor. Her mother is the one who's always getting in trouble for like wearing the brooches with the black face and stuff.
Ah. Okay,
and she lives in Kensington Palace. So like her mom is the cousin of the queen, or, not the sister. I'm not a royalist, as I said. She's close. She lives like Kensington Palace, like right next door to Kensington Palace, because we dropped her off one night after dinner,
Did you go
party.
inside? Did you go inside?
No, but we were staying next door in a hotel. But I'll tell you a funny story. I was there with this rock star who was a big fan of like the royals, and we were at this private dinner, with like an MP's son and all these fancy people. And he invited Ella to the concert we were doing the next night at the Royal Albert Hall. And she goes, yeah, I'd love to attend. And then he turns to me, I'm his road manager. He goes, make sure it happens. So I'm like, okay, Ella, what's your last name so I can put you down for tickets? And she goes, Windsor. And don't worry, I have a box there. I don't need tickets. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a good story.
Yeah.
I once was allowed into the front foyer of Buckingham Palace. You'd think, I was excited. They said, I was trying to set up an interview with Prince Charles for the CBS, I think, or maybe it was CBC, but I think it was CBS. And And it was quite a process. It was a long courtship. We had to talk to them for a long period of time, and then we got to know his PR people, and then they finally said, "Well, come over to the UK and meet us in person." So fly to London, have another series of meetings, and then they said, "You'll go to Buckingham Palace tomorrow and meet the press secretary of the Queen." And I said, "Okay, that's fine." So I was excited because I thought maybe they'd give me a tour of the place. But really, they let you into like the front hallway,
right?
And they're like, "Here's some cookies that I think it was Prince Philip. Prince Philip's favorite cookies. We got to taste those. And we had some tea, and they said, "Thank you very much." So we drove all the way in, got to see the front bit where the press secretary lives and works, and then we got sent back. But then later on that day, after I met the other press secretary, I had this incredible thing with the Queen and Prince Philip drove by me in cars. And they saw me and they waved at me. So I was like, wait a second, that's not just by accident. That does not just happen by accident. This is part of the process. Sorry. This is part of the process of the ceremony. This is what they do very, very well at Buckingham Palace, and they do very well in the royal world. And that to me is normally very exciting and was really a thrill to get to, at least connect with them. But maybe there's more to the royal world than we realize, and that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. But first, we should talk about the big news of the day. I think they should just, they should just come up with a new term, Arizona dumb, because everything that's coming out of Arizona right now is just makes me. I love Arizona, by the way. Who doesn't love Arizona? The most beautiful place on the planet, nicest people, just a great, great place. And then on top of it, they've elected this group of people to run their state, and they're making all these terrible decisions. Now, firstly, that the fraud audit, whatever it is that they're doing, this incredibly stupid recount of the recount of the recount of the recount. And then today we found out that their governor has signed a bill into law that's going to make it even harder for people to receive mail-in ballots. So they're just not satisfied with the fact that they're still questioning an election from last November. They're now actually, making it really hard in the future for anyone to vote in any other way other than for Republicans. And I'll go through another few Arizona dumb things, but I know you've got a few too.
Yeah, I do. Well, sorry about that. Well, you spoke about that law, and after the Arizona Senate passed it, the governor signed it within minutes. So they're going full fascist in Arizona because they know that Phoenix, is the largest city in Arizona, and it went Democratic. They were shocked that Biden won in this last election, and like many other states that used to be red that have turned blue, Georgia, for example, they're trying to make sure it never happens again. And they're somehow a fertile breeding ground for the QAnon type, Andy Biggs, who's a representative from there in Congress, who's out of his mind, and it's a scary place, and it's a fertile breeding ground for sort of white supremacist, reactionary nationalist forces to take hold. And they're fighting the tide of reality, which is a diverse population that's going to vote Democratic. So it's sort of like the last gasp of trying to hold on to power. But when they can turn it into law like they are, and we don't stop it, it's a horrifying situation.
Well, it's not only there. That's the thing. I mean, the GOP is now making this their strategy. They're basically going to be doing everything they can to break the rules or change the rules or do whatever they need to make sure that they're constantly reelected. Now, the thing is, the people of the world can see this. I mean, we can see that you're being anti-democratic. We can see that you're taking away votes from people. We can see that there are no equal rights here. So it's not like you're doing something that's super smart. Just go full fascist. Just declare a dictatorship and decide that. These like incremental steps are just embarrassing because it's so obvious what you're doing. I mean, it just drives me nuts.
Absolutely. And Stacey Abrams put out a statement right after this thing happened this afternoon. And she said this new law will kick off like 30% of the Latino voters off of the polls because it affects the early voting thing that was so popular in Phoenix, in this county. And we have to do something about it. The pressure was applied to Georgia, and hopefully something will happen there with their sort of draconian voter law. But Arizona, I mean, as we saw with this sort of cyber ninjas that they brought in to recount this election, as you mentioned, 6 months after it was, fully decided.
So stupid, really.
Absolutely. And they want to knock on doors. Like they've already been told, no, you can't go knock on people's doors and ask them how they voted. That was shot down last week. And then today, the sheriff just went crazy because they wanted access to the passwords of the voter data in the county, which has people's medical records. It has their voting history. I mean, it's insane to put that kind of information into a company's hand that supported the president in conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I mean they're breaking the law right now. They're creating all these
Right.
things that are, and it's not like the former president had a good relationship with the law. He's broken the law many times. I don't know if any of him and his associates should be having access to the police passwords or the county passwords. Who knows what they might do if they checked in there? I mean, especially when you look at his other friends from Florida, where Greenberg and Gates have been their misadventures with the law. God knows what they would do in Arizona if they had those same passwords and the same access that Greenberg had to mine Bitcoin. I'm sorry, I'm melding all these stories together, but I just thought I might, because I'm expecting tonight. We're expecting the big announcement about whether he gets a plea bargain tonight. So we'll see whether that happens in the next hour as well. Maybe it's happened. I just haven't noticed. One of the senators, Paul Boyer of Arizona, who was in favor of the original audit in Arizona, now also says he really makes them look like idiots. Indeed they do. They look really stupid in front of the world, and this will get worse and worse. Now, what do you think the end game is here, Noel? What do you think the goal is?
I think the goal is to not participate in national elections. I think, as crazy as that sounds, I think what Georgia is trying to do, what they're trying to do in Maricopa County, is if they don't like the results, they're going to say our guy won anyway. I think they're trying to sort of distance themselves from the democratic process and install sycophants that are loyal to Trumpism and this insanity, and sort of muscle their way in, and then assume that no one's going to go in and rout them out, so to speak, because they own that territory. I mean, yesterday there was the state of Virginia was nominating their Republican nominee, the GOP nominee in Virginia. And the guy hired his own security guard to stand outside of the ballot counting room
Are you
in
serious?
this hotel. Yeah, and he was like a neo-Nazi dude, And then they found out later that he wasn't the RNC security. He was this private guy that this candidate had brought in to sort of intimidate everybody and stand outside of the door. And he's got the neck tattoos. He looked like he was one of the guys who charged the Capitol. But
Right.
so it was a show of force, a fascistic show of force.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to do is take over and scare everybody. And it worked in Germany to some extent. They're going full bore with this fascism, and they know they have somewhat of an army of support, so to speak.
I think that's one possibility, that they'll just stay, active in the democratic process, but act fascist. The scarier scenarios are that what they're doing is building up this nationalist base in some of these states, and they might actually decide to just secede, or not necessarily full secession. They might just say, well, Arizona and Florida and whatever other states are able to build up enough support, well, they're no longer ruled by the president of the United States as we know it. They're ruled by the secondary president, or whatever they want to call Donald Trump. And so that worries me, because I don't think the goal behind that is to actually create a separate part of the United States. It's all about money. It's all about, creating a protectorate over certain industries and being able to tax them and do whatever you need to with them, and not have to pay into the federal pie.
Absolutely. And it also sows discord. Even if they were just to not certify a vote count, they'd throw a wrench into the works that halts the democratic process. That's a lot of what January 6th was about. They were hoping to just disrupt it enough that they couldn't certify Joe Biden on that day. So these individual states can do the same sort of thing, and they can buy time for somebody like Trump so he can further profit, and they can sow discord in America. And as you know, most of these things are being funded by Putin anyway. So it goes to their chaos agents, and when they're doing it on behalf of somebody like Trump, who's represented by Putin, and Putin is giving safe haven to all these cyber criminals. We see what's happening this week with the oil, with the oil pipelines here in the States.
Story.
Right. So imagine all of that stuff happening at once, and it's a perfect storm of very dangerous things, and then markets fall and all kinds of domino effects happen from something like this. I think January 6th was a taste of things to come if we don't really react stealthily and smartly about what's happening now.
I agree with you. I think, we could be seeing the next time if the Congress has to ratify a vote, presidential vote, they may not ratify a president. So they may not agree
Right.
in 2024 who the next president should be. And then what? That seems to be where we're heading. It seems, if the current Republican Party, as it's constituted, continues to do what it's doing, which is being this fascist outlaw party, that is where we'll be, what we'll be staring at in 2024. And the question is, you talk about being stealth and being responsive, but what do you do when you've got Russia, holding you by the you-know-whats because they have your entire cyber infrastructure rigged? It's that colonial hack was not just coincidental.
Right.
I mean, that was done on purpose and deliberately and done with the intent to disrupt all the gas supply to the eastern seaboard.
Right.
I mean, there's a huge balancing act we still have to do with the global impact on us and also these local forces that are trying to rule their own states.
I agree with you completely. And what we have to do is we have to pass HR1. We have to end the filibuster. We have to realize what we're up against and who we're fighting against. We can't play nice anymore. This is our one shot in the Senate to make these things happen. If it doesn't happen now under Biden, I don't think it's going to happen. These laws are coming in place now in Arizona and Georgia and stuff because they want to take back the Senate in the midterms.
Now, if HR1 is published, is ratified and passed as law, does it overtake all these state laws, or does it make them mute, or do they still continue to exist in sort of contrast to, or in opposition to the HR1? I don't know enough about it, but maybe you do.
I don't either. It protects the right of voters. I haven't read the legislation, but it goes a long way towards protecting things that are now unprotected and able to be thrown out at the municipal level. The scary thing here is that these local governments can put in these laws saying you can't give somebody water, it's against the law, all these things to disrupt the democratic process and to kick people off the voter rolls. The crux of all this, DeSantis signed a bill last week in Florida doing the same thing. They're basically trying to disenfranchise black voters. It's basically an extension of, Jim Crow era. Like, look, the white guys lost this last time. The conservative Republican white guys lost, and we want to make sure it never happens again because they know they're sort of outnumbered. Progress is coming, and we're in a diverse country now where everybody should have a vote and a voice. And the last bastion of sort of cheating racist white men want to make sure that never happens again. And you have to fight against that. You have to say, nope, your time is, you're not, if you don't get elected fairly, you're not taking office.
100%. Now, it'll be interesting in next year's elections. Is it next year already? I can't believe I'm saying that. Yeah. Yes, next year's elections, they will likely win the House, right? I mean, it seems the way they've gerrymandered a lot of the House seats, especially in Texas, it looks like they may win the advantage in the House. Are they then going to be okay with the Democrats saying, well, no, you didn't win, we're going to recount everything because now we're following your precedents? Oh, I'm sorry about your claim of victory here, but we think we need to have several audits that are going to last 3 years before we allow you to take those seats, because that's where we're heading. It's a complete stalemate. And of course, nobody wants that. But at the end of the day, it's going to happen. There's a possibility that kind of reaction could happen.
I agree completely. And here's the thing with Trump and what he does. Like, you don't go back to normal after you've been broken in the way that he sort of sullied this country. Yeah. Look at Atlantic City, use Atlantic, go to Atlantic City. It's not the same since Trump, his casinos are either torn down or they're shuttered and there's people sleeping on the boardwalk. Like he decimated that city. Everything he touches dies, to quote Rick Wilson, So like, the violations and the molestation that he sort of did on the democratic process, for lack of a better term, it doesn't just go away. We've now lowered the discourse to a point that it never goes back to where it was before. No. We're never back to the era of civility. Look what's happening with Elise Stefanik this week. She's now the third most powerful Republican in Congress. She's a lunatic. And
she used to be so sane and sensible, and now it turns out that she's not really sane or sensible, or she's just very strategic. I mean,
She's
how
just
do they make this work for themselves? How do they wake up in the morning and say, I'm just going to go lie to the American people just so I can claim power? I mean, I don't
because
know.
it's the only way. It's the future. Trump
Yeah.
has showed them the future. It's racism, it's being a troll and a bully, and it's kissing that man's ring. She went to Harvard. Like, she was against the Muslim ban, she was against all this stuff in the beginning, and then she saw how powerful she was, and she has her own ambitions, and she skewed towards whack job anyway. So my family lives up in Albany. Like, she there was one time where she said somebody left a note on her car that said, like, die fascist scum or something, which clearly she made herself and just did it because she knew it would go viral. So she understands the cycle of outrage in the way your Matt Getz and your Jim Jordans do. It's not about legislating, it's about getting attention and getting Trump's attention, and the people that he commands, having them support you, has become more valuable to these GOP congressmen than actually legislating or operating by their own designs and intelligence.
Yeah.
They're not representing their constituents, they're pleasing their master.
Yeah, I don't know if it can't really be about him, right? It can't be about Donald Trump himself. It's got to be about people above him or around him. He's not that powerful at the end of the day, maybe in their mind, but I mean, how much power can that man have?
Right.
I just keep seeing like a grandfather in diapers, and I mean, like, how much sway is he holding over you? Really?
When I say him, I don't mean him. I mean the people he commands and the people who command Trump. Trump isn't Trump without Bannon, and Roger Stone and all these guys. Trump wants to walk into a room. He wants music to play. He wants to get high, and he wants to talk about his grievances. He doesn't see the big picture. But Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, all these other guys that make a fortune off of Trump, Vladimir Putin, they understand the value in his base. And the people that when I say support Trump, understand that power can protect and promote them too, and they want some of it.
Those are all great segues. I got about 4 of them there to get into the crown, because it's such an interesting conversation. I want to bring David in. So let's do this. I thought it was going to have, there's 2 of me. Look at that. I thought it was going to have some nice, royal music there, but to introduce you, David, I'm sorry about that. You could have played along with your violin, but you don't have that with you. Hi, David Klinkenberg. It's great to have you with us tonight. You've met Noel before the show. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing great, and I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
We've been talking for a very, very long time. You reached out to me out of the blue, and you're like, I have a theory. I have a code, in fact, and we'll get into the code a little bit later on about what you found. But we started talking, and we've been talking for months, literally. And David has a really unique perspective. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, you're a violinist by trade. This is the thing you do. You traveled around the world because you're so good at being a violinist, and you've done that since you were, 4 years old?
Yeah, I started with the Chicago Youth Symphony program.
Wow. I can't imagine being 4 years old and picking up a violin and doing anything other than like trying to break it. I can't imagine that. Yeah. But I don't know what got into you to do that. What made you start?
My sister played the piano, and my mom looked at me when I was 4 years old and said, "Do you want to play something?" And I said, "Okay." I didn't even know what she was talking. I had no idea the commitment I had just signed myself up for.
Wow. Well,
that's awesome.
It took you around the world, and you sold so many records, and you've touched so many people with your music, which is mostly in the inspirational sort of gospel classical era, right? I mean, I don't know enough about music, but it's stuff that you would listen to if you were mostly. Well, describe your music. Let you describe it.
Yeah, I began classical. I was mentored by the great-granddaughter of Antonin Dvorak, and so my whole upbringing was with her as a mentor, so it was pure classical. And then I started doing shows. And very early on, my teachers were asking me to do shows to promote their teaching and around the Chicago area. And most people, they don't want to hear classical. If you're doing a show in front of 1,000 people, they want to hear The Devil Went Down to Georgia. and so I was getting all, Danny Boy, and almost everything was within the folk genre that audiences wanted to hear. So I kind of skewed into folk. And most of my shows now, in fact, all of my shows for the last 10 years have been in theaters around the world, and I do a mixture of folk from around the world, so Celtic and bluegrass. I mean, I still have a classical bent, but yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, Scotty Stoneman was a great, violinist, bluegrass era who, influenced Jerry Garcia and stuff. So there's a lot of, I love folk music. I love classical music, and I'm just impressed by that whole thing. It's awesome that you found your way into your own niche, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that style of music. I think bluegrass is really the new jazz of the American landscape as far as music goes. I mean, most of the great players is skewed into folk. Mark O'Connor, even Itzhak Perlman, Sheryl Crow, Alison Krauss, all the greats. They've all skewed bluegrass. Even Norah Jones, her latest record was bluegrass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Can tell that David's pretty extraordinary, but you can also tell that he's pretty extraordinary not only because he's able to play the violin so well, but he's in his travels around the world. You grew fascinated with the idea of visiting caves and the oldest points of humanity everywhere you were traveling, or where human existence was. So tell us a little bit about what it was that you were driving to find out as you were visiting these different locations around the world, and what was that interest? Is it just an anthropological interest, or what drove you to this quest that you had?
Yeah, everywhere I went around the world, I've been to over 100 countries, and I would always, after the shows, ask to be taken to the oldest human settlements. And so I've just been absolutely everywhere. And what drove me to that was this finding of the world story. You can read about it now in a book that was recently published called The Origin of World Mythology. But essentially around the world, you find that all of the villages, all of the nations, all of the empires throughout the entire history of the planet, around the entire world, Polynesia, from Japan and China to Alaska to Patagonia, to everywhere in between, Europe, Africa, everywhere has been telling the exact same story.
What do you mean by the exact same story? What is that? What is that story?
Well, the story has 10 points to it. It's got 10 essential major, what they call plot points or myth elements to it. And it's very specific, and it's about how humans came about living on this planet. And whatever you want to think about the interpretation of that story, the very fact that the story is the same everywhere, it includes dragons, it includes gods and goddesses and monsters, and the creation of human beings, and the gods cleared out a land for the human beings to live on by killing the dragons. And it's a very specific story, and it's told absolutely everywhere.
Which is remarkable, really, when you think about how people believe they're developed separately. People don't believe that we've developed together, and certainly not to that extent where we would be sharing myths like that. Why? How did that happen?
Well, that's where the cave started. I wanted to get to the earliest human populations, and what I started to find was this extraordinary pattern in the cave paintings. The cave paintings all use the same symbols, and those symbols have been largely disregarded by historians and scientists and anthropologists because they didn't know what they meant. But they were basically like these circles and hash marks around the animals. Almost all the ancient cave paintings are of animals. In fact, every single major ancient cave painting from Chauvet to Lascaux to Indonesia and Borneo to Alaska and Patagonia, they're all of animals. And
so these are significant. Let me just slow you down a little bit here, so we're not, so everyone's following these. These are significant archaeological finds. These are very important finds in the world, and you've been to visit many of them, and you've seen that these paintings are mostly of animals, right? They're specifically of buffalo or those kinds, or whatever they were tracking at the time. And then on top of that, there is what, hashtags or numbers or circles or something that indicates an important significance, right?
Yeah, they were counting something, and nobody has put those pieces together. But a colleague of my dad's, who was a biologist for the energy department, wrote a book called Biological Time, where he essentially proved, I think beyond any reasonable doubt, that what they were doing was they were tracking the behavior of the animals based on the sun and the moon. So when you actually look, for example, at Chauvet, Werner Herzog recently did a documentary called The Cave of Forgotten Dreams, where he goes into Chauvet Cave. And it's the first time we get to see these earliest paintings. They're 32,000 years old. And all of the paintings aren't just of animals, they're of animals doing specific things. So you have like the scene of the rhinos. The rhinos are facing off, and they do this during the fall mating season. You look at the two lions, two cave lions, and they're in the mating ritual. And so the animals weren't just the random paintings of animals, they were painting of animals doing specific things. And then next to the animals, or below the animals, you'd see these hash marks. And they were counting the months of the year to count when, and then the circle would be what was the window of time that that animal was doing that specific thing. So they weren't just random markings on a which they thought that they were. Some people have speculated that they were just testing the paintbrush. I mean, all kinds of speculations, but what we now know is that they were tracking these animals. So it was much more sophisticated than we thought.
And not just tracking these animals individually, because all these track marks, all these markings or the hash marks, whatever, all of these are very similar, or in fact, almost the same in each part of the world. So like the myths that you're talking about, there was another thing, another skill that was being traded around the world, or that the whole world seemed to know about, which was following these animals and how they mated and how they came to eat and their basic habits, and that humans were tracking all of these animals simultaneously around the world using the same markings on caves.
That is precisely it. You've really hit the nail on the head. The guy that first really kind of cracked this code in Lascaux only used Lascaux Cave. Being all over the world and seeing that every cave system on the planet was doing the exact same kind of tracking. I mean, you're looking at what would be a collection of extraordinary significance. I mean, all of the major plants and animals of every region was being tracked biologically based on patterns in their behavior, as those patterns were being tracked against the lunar and solar calendar. And these paintings date back to the earliest settlements in every region. So what I determined was that there was a extensive connection, a network of communication, very similar to our Pony Express in the United States, but that there was a network of communication across the nomadic world that's much more extensive than we had anticipated.
How far back are we talking about?
Well, this is where it becomes pretty clear what occurred. When you look at the origin of the human species, we all began in sub-Saharan Africa. And for the majority of the time that humans have been on the planet, several 100,000 years of Homo sapiens existence on planet Earth, we lived in a very small part of the Earth. And there weren't very many of us. And it was assumed that at the cognitive revolution, which was 50,000 years ago roughly, that all of the humans spread out in individual pods, that they all broke away from each other and began taking parts of the planet as individual family units. And what I found is that this is just not true. The humans had an enemy. That enemy was the other hominids, the Neanderthal being the largest and strongest among them. And they had attempted to make incursions into Neanderthal territory several times, but had always been beaten back. And after they discovered that they could track animal patterns against the sun and the moon, they realized they could track Neanderthal patterns as well against the sun and the moon, because the Neanderthals were tracking the animals and were following the animals. And they came together as a single unit. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, came together as a single population of Homo sapiens. And they taught each other this tracking mechanisms. And they planned the taking of the planet from the Neanderthals as a single unit. And it's that simple shift in our understanding of how Homo sapiens took the planet that really cast this very, very long shadow into the modern world.
So we originated in sub-Saharan Africa, and then we didn't individually go out or in tribes. We, as a group, determined how we were going to beat Neanderthals and then take over the world. Put it simply. And then since then, you're also saying there's been constant communication between between the humans of the world, that they've been constantly meeting on a regular basis and sharing knowledge, like how to track animals, or what are you saying?
Yes, what there was a hierarchy of councils. So it began with the tribal and family councils, but they sent a representative to the clan, and everybody's familiar with the clan. If you've ever watched any show at all, like Game of Thrones or Vikings or any sort of even modern show, we're familiar with the concept of the clan. The clan governed dozens of family units. There were thousands of members of the clan, but it didn't stop there. The clan sent a delegate up the chain, and we know this throughout the Western Hemisphere. When we began studying the Native Americans and the Mayans and the Aztecs in the Western Hemisphere, a great book called 1491 by Charles Mann came out, a Pulitzer Prize winning author, incredible historian. And he pieces this, the now known history of the Western Hemisphere.
Oops.
It's staggeringly different from the history that we used to think even 30 or 40 years ago, when we used to believe that there was only several hundred thousand, or maybe even from 100,000 to several hundred thousand human beings living in the Western Hemisphere prior to the European colonization. We now know that number, that most people are staggered by the new number, but that new number has been increased to more than 100 million. 100 million human beings living in the Western Hemisphere. And they weren't living in small bands of isolated families. We know that they were trading from Alaska all the way down to Patagonia. And they had extensive trading networks. All of their myths are the same. All of their buildings are the same.
So you're saying, let me slow you down a little bit, because I just want to...
national level. At the national level, we know the major tribal groups, like the Shoshone, like the Utes, like the Ojibwa. Well, that national chain sent delegates up the chain. So the national councils knew each other. So then the same was happening in the Eastern Hemisphere as well.
So just explain this. Let me simply pause you there for a second.
Vastly more sophisticated.
I know you can talk
than we
forever.
had anticipated.
You're gonna have to let me stop.
And it's this feature of the hunting and gathering world that explains the collapse of civilizations as you study them with the history of civilization. So when you look at the history of civilization, what you find is from Jericho, the very earliest city that we have excavated, it began believed to be established around 9400 BC. That city develops for a period of time and then suddenly collapses. And then it develops for a period of time and then suddenly collapses. And it looks like these are about 1,000 to 1,200 year spans between the collapse points of Jericho. Then you look at the modern history of civilization, and the exact same trend continues, except on a larger scale. The Akkadian Empire is the first empire that we know of. It collapses in 2385, a massive collapse. You move forward to the Egyptian Empire. The late Bronze Age collapse, again, about 1,000 years later, this massive collapse of civilizations. Over 80% of the population declines over about a 100-year period. Move forward to the Roman Empire, the exact same thing occurs, a massive collapse of civilizations. And the same thing occurs with the Mayans. And everyone assumed there's two paradigms that have been competing. One paradigm is the overwhelming paradigm that historians have accepted, that these are natural events. What I have done is amassed enough evidence to move way beyond the threshold of doubt that these are not natural events at all. There's no evidence that they were natural, that these are planned events.
All right, I want to stop David. Can you hear me? David, can you hear me still? I hope you can hear me.
Because no one could anticipate a mechanism by which the hunters and gatherers were able to coordinate these collapses.
David, stop there for a second. Can you hear me still? I just want to make sure you can hear me. Is that okay?
Do you guys have any questions? Because I have more I can say.
I can. I think you can hear me. I don't think you can. Can you hear me at all? Can you hear me? You can't hear me. I didn't think you could hear me.
I can hear you.
I know you can. I'm just wondering if David, can you hear me? It's such a. I mean, it's a fascinating story. I've heard David say so much of this before. It's fascinating, and you get swept away, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I got to ask this one question. Right. If he and then you forget it because there's so many others. So he's going to rejoin us.
He's going to leave and come back. Wow, what a like fascinating story. Like
one of the smartest people you've ever encountered. So for me, it's like every time I speak to him, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to just take notes because he's just too smart for anyone's knowledge. But let me see if I can get him back here. I might have to move him windows, but let me see if this works. Are you back there, David?
Can you hear us?
I'm back.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
No. Before that was amazing. That was incredible. Yeah. You blow my mind every time we talk to each other, and I just want to make sure that everyone's following all of this because we sort of race through so much that let's talk a little bit about the council. You're saying that this council existed. All these regional councils of tribes sent their representatives to where? Where did they send them to?
Central Council changed locations over this. We're talking about thousands of years. So the Central Council changed locations. It was a nomadic council. The Central Council went by many names in the historical record. One of the names that it went by in the Egyptian period, they called it the All-Seeing Eye. And it's this symbol of the all-seeing eye that we see around the world. I mean, and we also see it in so many mythologies. It's in, obviously, I mean, immediately you think of J.R. Tolkien, you think of Lord of the Rings, right. You think of that symbol that you see on the dollar over the Egyptian pyramid. This is the symbol of the Central Council. I want to just, before, I know we've had these conversations, and sometimes you can go for a long time without me getting these points down for myself. So I don't want to ask them. So, and then you also mentioned just one other thing. So you mentioned the 100 million humans who lived before Western civilization as we know it. So can you benchmark that for us? Like, when was that our current history suggests that all the civilization started? And then also, when did these 100 million people live?
Okay, yes. Our civilization as we know it begins at what we call the agricultural revolution. It's a bit of a misnomer because the agricultural revolution was actually spawned by the invention of animal husbandry. It was the ability to keep and breed animals in captivity that created this major shift toward a sedentary lifestyle. So the big gap between the hunting and gathering lifestyle and the sedentary lifestyle, this gap was predicated on the discovery of animal husbandry. Because as we know, Native Americans were engaged in agriculture for thousands of years after the Mesopotamian event, and agriculture did not spawn that shift to a sedentary lifestyle the way that it did in Europe. And it was animal husbandry is that marker. And we now know exactly when animal husbandry began. Large-scale animal husbandry begins. We can even pinpoint it down to the mile marker. It's about 12 miles northwest of Navali, Turkey, 9600 BC. The very earliest animals began massive domestication efforts. So we know that
BC.
Yeah,
right. And so before that, Turkey. There were 100 million other humans in the world doing all sorts of other things.
No. We're not talking in the world. The 1491 is just about the Americas. We're talking just about the Western Hemisphere. So 1491 estimates, the anthropologists have estimated that in 1491, before the Europeans colonized the Americas, that there was somewhere around 100 million human beings living in the Western Hemisphere. So what this does is it just dramatically scales up what our understanding of what hunting and gathering culture could accomplish. I mean, you look at places like Cahokia in the Americas, you're looking at a massive 2,200 acre site. There's a pyramid the size of the Pyramid of Giza, enormous stone defensive palisades. There's even a wooden Stonehenge in the exact configuration of Stonehenge, just made out of wood, that they've discovered. So what all of the evidence around the world has determined is that the hunting and gathering lifestyle was significantly more advanced than we had anticipated, and that they had a government structure, and this is the critical point. They had a government structure that was capable of coordinating enormous populations over incredibly extended periods of time. So you look at a discovery like Göbekli Tepe, which probably both of you are familiar with, right? Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It was discovered in 1994. The reason why it was so significant is because it predates the agricultural revolution. It's the only massive monument of its time that predates agriculture. So it had to have been created by hunters and gatherers. Its construction period was over 11,000 years ago. And we see nothing else like that until the pyramids, nothing else that sophisticated. So we know that Göbekli Tepe was not just a single temple. You're looking at about 50 or 60 different temples when they've done ground penetrating radar. And what they believe is that this temple complex is being constructed for around 1,000 to 2,000 years. They would create a circular temple, massive stone circular temple, and then they would bury it. And then they would start construction on a temple right next door of the exact same configuration or very similar configuration. And then they would bury it. And this process went on. Gathering culture was able to coordinate massive populations for centuries and centuries of time.
It's these council structures that
so these councils of hunters and gatherers would then domesticate humans.
What these councils of hunters and gatherers did is that they, what you're looking at then is you have to completely reimagine the origin of civilization in light of the fact that in the Eastern Hemisphere, Jericho would have been for thousands of years. Jericho is less than 1,000 people. Jericho is literally within walking distance of Göbekli Tepe. It's about a few hundred miles, but I mean, you could walk there. I mean, so Jericho was right in the backyard of Göbekli Tepe, meaning Jericho was being constructed, and the inhabitants of Jericho were living at a time when hunters and gatherers were able to amass enormous populations towards incredibly sophisticated building projects, meaning whoever did Göbekli Tepe, whatever government structure was coordinating the creation of Göbekli Tepe, would have been able to wipe Jericho off the map whenever it chose to.
So this much older, more sophisticated, more tech-savvy, more advanced group of humans who had then amassed a different group of humans, basically, to do all this work for them.
The hunters and gatherers would have been in a position with the government structure that they had, this hierarchy of councils culminating in a central council. The central council could coordinate the maneuvers of all of the various tribal councils simultaneously. So when you look at like the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, the historical record is very clear. Massive tribes of hunters and gatherers were attacking the region. They were choking off the trade routes. They were poisoning the water supplies. They had a very specific plan of attack. They would do guerrilla warfare where they would come in and do hit and run tactics. They did this for decades and decades until the Akkadian Empire finally collapses. Then you move to the Egyptian Empire and the exact same thing. Just for your audience, just Google the Sea People's invasion.
We're going to have lots of time to talk all of these, because we're going to have you back. And we've got so much more to cover in terms of all the collapses of these different empires. But just for today, just because I want to be able to bring everyone back to the idea of what we're trying to discuss today. So you've got these supreme councils, you've got these councils, and each of them have these tribal representatives that go up to these central councils. What you're talking about is really a royal structure. You're talking about a structure of power that's handed down over hereditary lines for centuries, really. And it looks and feels a lot like royal families would today. I mean, obviously they don't look the same, but they we're talking about that same kind of government in terms of how they operated.
It is not just a same kind. It is the direct descendant of. The entire global network of royal families directly descend from these nomadic tribal nations. That's why the House of Windsor used to be called in 1914. It was called the House of Saxe, Coburg, and Goth. They directly descended from the Saxons and the Goths. The current kings and queens in the Middle East, the Saudi Arabian government, King bin Salman. They directly. They're open about it. They trace their heritage back to the nomadic tribal governments that governed the oases in the desert thousands of years ago. All of the royal families of the world, and there are millions of them. What the American population is unfamiliar with is the true breadth and extent of the royal world. 245 years ago, when the United States was, fighting a revolutionary war, the entire planet was governed by one royal house or another. The entire planet.
Right.
And then the United States carved out a tiny little fraction of the earth, these 13 colonies, that we shrugged off royal rule. But the entire planet was governed by royalty and this very sophisticated, very old network of hierarchical councils, which still exists today. The exact same structure.
Not only did they each have their own royalty, but that they also met on a regular basis to coordinate policy, is what you're saying. So that there is one world government, essentially, you're suggesting. I mean, I don't know if there's any evidence of this, but there's one world government that all these royal families ultimately met together every year, or whenever they went, I guess, and discussed how the world would proceed. They would discuss policy for the next few years.
Yes, they've had this has been going on for thousands of years. The current royal structure is a direct descendant of the nomadic structure. It's direct descendants of the same people, the same houses. They have been dealing with this hierarchical council structure for so long that it's absolutely entrenched in how the royal families govern themselves. And there's no disputing that. What's interesting is that you can go through the entire historical record, but you can also just walk straight in the front door. There's absolutely no one who disputes the fact that there are dozens and dozens of royal councils: the Order of the Bath, the Order of the Golden Chrysanthemum, the Order of the Garter, the Order of the British Empire. The Queen of England sits at the head. You can just Google this. You can just look. I mean, it's right on her page. They're not hiding it. They sit at the head of dozens of these, over 30 of these royal councils. You could take just one of them, and I would like to go over this just very quickly while we have time.
Yeah, sure.
You could take just one of them, the Order of the Bath. The Order of the Bath has 2,400 members. Each member is a patriarch or matriarch of their own family structure. 2,400. It's in 3 separate tiers. The Queen of England sits at the sovereign of this structure. You ask, like, okay, Prince Charles, as they talk about in the news, he's gaining more of the power structure of the royal world. What does this mean? Well, what this means is he's actually now ascended to the great master. He is now the great master of the Order of the Bath.
Right.
So their decisions are binding on all members of the Bath. If you can imagine 2,400 of the most powerful people throughout Europe, when a decision is made at the Order of the Bath, it is binding on all members beyond any other orders or any other groups or councils that they may be involved in. It's over God, it's over country. The Bath comes first, meaning in that one order, you would be able to totally control the destinies of the future of Europe. They control all monetary policy. They control all media. They're at the head of every major military organization. They're the head of the Defense Department. They're the head of the infrastructure. The secretaries of state. Almost every prime minister has been royal, dating back to the inception of the prime ministership. There is not one area of Europe that this royal network wouldn't be able to totally control. We would have to be assuming that the Order of the Bath and all those other councils are still meeting the same way they always did, but they're choosing not to control the destiny of Europe because of their love of democracy and the democratic process?
Not likely. Not likely. Here, by the way, is the peerage.com, which you and I have spoken about before. This is tell us what peerage is. Tell us exactly what we're looking at as we scroll through all these different houses, I guess, of power.
Of course, yeah. So this is just one of the sort of eye-opening websites that I do show people, just to let them breach the subject of what we're talking about here and the extent of it. When people think of the royal families, they sometimes think of like 12 or 13 families. They'll sometimes think of the Rockefellers and Rothschilds. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. You go to a place like thepeerage.com. Peer means a member of the royal network. So that's what it means to be a peer. You are a member of the royal family network. So you have official title. So when you go to thepeerage.com and you just click on the index, okay, and you start to scroll through the families, you get carpal tunnel before you get down to the H's. I mean, it is it is an extraordinary list, hundreds and hundreds of families, and you're looking at a collection of people who, if they were independent of one another, you would still have to worry about their interfamily relationships, but they're not independent of one another. They're all still engaged in the exact same mechanisms of control that they've had for centuries and centuries. Back when we knew that the network of royal families controlled the destiny of Europe, all you have to do is go back 150 years. These family groups go all the way back into the Middle Ages. They're the Order of the Bath, the Order of the Chrysanthemum, the Order of the Garter. All of these major orders go back centuries and centuries. They're operating in the exact same way they always have, and absolutely nobody has any eyes on it. What's so fascinating is, I mean, I just got done talking to one of the heads of the Department of Defense. But by the time I piece together the evidence, I'm just giving you guys the major broad strokes of the outline here. The evidence that I have is a mountain. It is an absolute mountain of evidence I'm sitting on. I just met recently with a senior member of the Department of Defense, and I just showed her. I only was able to meet for about a couple hours, but I just showed her the broad strokes of the evidence, and she said it's the most frightening thing she'd ever seen. We have absolutely no eyes on them at all.
Well, of course, they wouldn't let us in, and they have all the eyes on us, because really, I mean, we think of modern history. or the period of time that America's existed, it's such a fraction of time compared to the history that these people have ruled the planet. I mean, the amount of knowledge and resources and just know-how they've amassed over the thousands and thousands and thousands of years that they've ruled the countries of this, they've ruled the earth. I mean, there's nothing that America or any country could do to compare their knowledge to that. It's insurmountable, really, in some ways.
Well, what they're keeping is an ability to coordinate internationally over very, very long periods of time. And the average American should ask themselves, you can go throughout the Western Hemisphere too, right? You could go to Chile. You could look up the president of Chile. I was just down there recently. And I was talking with very well-educated Chilean students about the state of their country. And I just said, I mean, we were talking about the conquistadors now. The conquistadors married into this royal family lineage of the Incas and the Mayans, and how their current government is totally dominated by the descendants of those people. And you can just look up the Chilean president, and you'll see that he has a three-letter acronyms next to his name. Almost every president and prime minister in the entire Western Hemisphere, except for the United States. What the United States doesn't realize is it's the odd man out when it comes to this Royal Council network.
Right.
We're the only country.
It's not the same democracy.
It's not. Yes, they're wondering what is manipulating and controlling their democracy, and they're under the impression that it's the United States, that it's our CIA still meddling with them like we did during the days of Allende and Pinochet. And I told them, I said, no. What is meddling in your democracy is the fact that your entire democracy is controlled by European royals. Your president is
not necessarily only Europeans. I mean, right now you've got European royals, but I mean, in terms of the impact of what this country has gone through in terms of the last few years, we've often spoken on this show about an alliance of countries, whether it's China, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, those are the countries that have, and Russia, of course, which have attacked American democracy. But you're opening us up to the idea that maybe it's much bigger than that, in that it could be an entire network of elites, of people that are both family elites because they've got hereditary titles, but also because they've got lots of money, and that whole network might be what we're facing.
Yeah, what I have come across is enough evidence about the hereditary title network, which you almost never hear about. It's vastly more extensive than anyone in the United States, even in our military and intelligence department. Believe me, I've talked with enough of them to know that they don't have eyes on this at all. And the extent of the royal network is, and the power that they wield is absolutely extraordinary. And also, I mean, all you have to ask yourself is, okay, 250 years ago, this network controlled the entire planet. That's undisputed. At what point in history do you think that they decided to give this planet to the democratic process? I mean, at what point did they say, oh, well, we've had a good run.
And at what point would they get upset about it? I mean, they got upset when they were told that they couldn't keep their money by America because they couldn't have their offshore accounts and they couldn't have all their secret hiding places for their money. And, when Obama started doing that to the world is when the world responded, with democracy sort of outgrown itself. It's gone beyond its necessary means of power.
Oh, and they know that their principal enemy is the democratic process. They cannot continue functioning as long as democracy. They have handled it before. They have dealt with it before. They know how to infiltrate all of its little nooks and crannies, and they are engaged in a very coordinated and very powerful dismantling of the global democratic process.
No, I want you to be able to jump in because I know I've heard some of the stuff before, but as a first time you're hearing this, I'd love to get your impressions and any questions for David.
It's mind blowing, and it all makes sense. And I'm just kind of like listening. I don't know if I have any intelligent enough questions to ask. Because I would bring. I better not say anything.
Okay, well then I have a question for Noel. I have a question. I have a question. I have a question.
I know what you mean. I
have a question for Noel then.
Right.
Okay, and I was listening for the first 15 minutes or so, and so I hate to put you on the spot here, but I am going to quote you. You said that the mother of Ella Windsor got in trouble often for having a brooch with blackface. So I just want to ask you, did she or the brooch have the blackface? Was she just happened to be wearing a brooch while she
don't
had
know
blackface?
Ella is very nice. Ella Windsor was educated at Brown. She was the one who like took ecstasy and went swimming in like the pool at like Windsor Cathedral or Castle or something. Her mom is the one, because he was asking me like what her relation is, and I don't have Google in front of me. She's a direct, she's Lady Ella Windsor. Her mom is the one, if you remember when Prince Harry got married to Meghan Markle, there was like an engagement ceremony or something, and there was a brouhaha because one of the royals wore a brooch that was like a blackface figurine. So that's Ella's mom.
Oh, so it was the brooch that had the blackface. She just she didn't just happen to be wearing a brooch while in blackface.
No.
The brooch itself had blackface. Wow.
Right. Whoever that lady is who's always getting bad press, Ella is her daughter. And Ella's actually very sweet and got her own bad press because she dated a Middle Eastern guy and they took ecstasy and went, swimming naked in one of the royal, cathedral castles or whatever. But, and I know a guy who's an OBE, Graham Nash. I used to work with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, so we used to tour all the time in London. And Graham didn't want really anything to do with that. He was the first guy to tell me like how the royals were just like how much money they controlled. He saw through all that BS like John Lennon did. But Americans get very transfixed by that. And it was Stephen Stills who was friends with them and would want to go there. And it was funny because Graham was from England. And OBE, made so by the Queen because of his contributions to the culture of England. He was in the Hollies and all this stuff, but he kind of wanted nothing to do with that pomp and circumstance. He was a working guy from Manchester and stuff. And it's funny, like what I didn't want to say before is I didn't want to take it back to Trump. But when Trump became president, his dream, like what he wanted to do first more than anything was go to London and have this big ceremony. And if you remember, he wanted them to drive him through London and he thought everybody was going to cheer in the streets. He thought it was going to be this big homecoming. And it wasn't, obviously, and he sort of had to sneak in the back door and it was a bit of a disaster. But his desire was to be amongst that kind of made family lineage. Exactly.
This was just the first time, by the way, that you're talking about there, but soon afterwards, he was, he went back a second time and he was really loved by Charles and Camilla. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I just thought this video is really interesting. They were really welcomed very warmly by Charles and Camilla as they went for dinner. It was hosted by the Canadian ambassador. And there is a sort of an affinity, as far as I understand, between Charles and Trump. You can see a little bit of open friendliness right there. That they went for a walk together privately. You see them laughing. They have a very they might even be closer ideologically than we realize. Certainly not on climate change, but on race issues, they may be an indication from some people that they're not necessarily that far away. Charles is not necessarily considered not racist, and so this here's of course meeting the Queen.
It would also be interesting to juxtapose Trump meeting all of the royals. If you look at his relationship with royalty and the red carpet that they rolled out for him, unlike anything I've ever seen for any other president, at least in my lifetime, it was very intriguing to see the way that royalty treated him worldwide. The Saudi royals, when he went to China, the way that they took him to the Forbidden City. I mean, it's unexplanatory, really.
That was the point I was trying to make. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? They gave him the orb dance,
and they did the sword dance, the big sword dance.
And that was the point I was trying to get to, is Trump, who was somebody who was from Queens, his grandfather owned brothels. He was the farthest thing from even WASP sort of royalty, like blue blood families in this country. So he desired to be accepted at that level so strongly. He's somebody who could recognize that and who sucked up to monarchies, as David just said, all around the world. And they welcomed him in because he was the kind of guy.
the fact that he sucked up to monarchies is probably, in my estimation, not as dramatic of a shift than in what would be normal. I know many wealthy people. I obviously being in the music industry, and I've just met so many celebrities. They are just infatuated because royalty is like that. Royalty is that step that they know they can never achieve. It's that one that it's like, they can look up at royals. And that fascinates, I think, the average celebrity. So the fact that you have powerful Americans looking.
Oh, sorry, you lost your audio there. I need to check something very quickly here. Are you guys seeing me? Are you,
yeah, we see you.
No, just sorry.
Oh.
No, earlier on, I never retweeted the Twitter feed, and I'm told by someone that our feed is not up. So I just need to make sure that it is up. Have you seen it on your Twitter feed?
I can't. I can look on my computer now.
Yeah,
I'm on the phone, so
we may have been talking to ourselves. I hope not. I hope not. But
David, we can't hear you.
Oh, and we can't hear you, David. Sorry. Oh, if it's okay, then people couldn't see the whole thing. Wow, he'll join us shortly. I gathered that he didn't broadcast.
I'm gonna look it up now.
Anyhow, you guys will tell me online if it's there or not, hopefully. And I apologize if it's not. Can't imagine why. There you go. Maybe we can imagine why. Every time something goes wrong in my life, I'm like on these shows, I'm like, maybe it's somebody doesn't want us to say these things.
Exactly.
David, welcome back. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you.
I want to just pause and still try to figure out here whether we're actually are, because I don't think we've actually been up live, which is fine. We can always put us replay it later on, but I don't see anyone responding, so we probably haven't been. But that's
no. It says 5.5. It says like 5,000 viewers.
Oh, it does. Okay, there you go. Someone retweeted us, so maybe we are. I can't see us, but there you are. We're there.
Hey, everybody.
I'm glad you've been here. I've been here. It's been fascinating. Such a great show. Look, David, we're going to have you back a million times. I'm sure of it, because if you'll come back on, because this is such fascinating territory. But I wanted to just tie up this thought that Noel was having there about, and you guys were talking about how warmly Trump was accepted by the royal families of the world, especially in the UK, as we've been mentioning, but also in Russia. I mean, even though we think of Putin as being the leader of Russia, just sort of as an autocrat, he probably has some royal, if not lineage, certainly has royal backing from the old Russian royal house.
Hey, can I just make a?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And along that point, Trump was trying to establish a monarchy here. I guarantee you that. That he wanted to hand off power to his daughter. That's why he brought his family involved. Like, if Trump could have been king, he would have taken that.
It felt like it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he was moving towards. It's like the all-knowing and all-seeing ruler and all fealty to the king. That suits Trump's personality better than anything in the world.
So, David, is there a connection between the royal family and Putin? Like, is there a royal connection to the Russian leadership?
There's a direct. This would be an episode on its own. But to make this as down and dirty as I can for the viewers, that hierarchical council within the nomadic world. Okay, this is why Putin, by the way, goes around with his shirt off and rides horses around. The same way why Kim Jong Un does it, and Kim Un Sung did it. That they're appealing back to that nomadic hierarchy, which they are aware of and a part of. The Russia and China diverged from royal rule, obviously, in the early 1900s. Right, both of them had a revolution. And royalty was disbanded as far as its leadership role. However, the council structure wasn't. What you simply had was if you look at the history of both Russia and China, they have a very similar government structure now. And what's fascinating to me is that when you look at the government structure of both Russia and China, which are related to one another, and you ask the simplest questions to our leaders, to our intelligence leaders in the United States, of what is the form of government that Russia is utilizing? What is the form of government that China is utilizing? You will find that they have almost no idea at all. And the reason why is because it's a form of government that the United States is simply unaware of. both of those countries for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Slavic world and the Asian world and the Chinese world, have been meticulously grading, Grading, grading the amount of contribution that each family unit has given to the empire. If you look at the history of the Slavic world, you can look up something called the Table of Ranks. So the Table of Ranks, and read about that. That will give you a brief overview of how the Slavic world has been ranking its families for centuries and centuries and centuries. They had a ranking system that was built on a two-tiered system. This two-tiered system was implemented by the Mongols in the 9th century, right, with the Kievan Rus, the famous Kievan Rus. That was the royal family lineage, but it wasn't part of the Slavic world, and it was imposed on the Slavic world. The Slavic world had a merit-based ranking system that didn't divide between a title holder, an inherited title holder, and every other Slav. So the ranking system that the Slavic world used ranked families for the, from the 9th century up until the Bolshevik Revolution with this two-tiered system, a system where the commoner could only get up to a particular level. Only inherited power could transcend that level. But as that system was functioning, same way in China, tweaks were being made to it to allow commoners to ascend up to the inherited title level. In fact, even Catherine the Great imposed a number of these changes. This is centuries ago, allowing a commoner to ascend to the rank of an inherited title. So they have a bureaucracy based on this merit-based system. If you achieved a certain title, you were granted inherited title. So you actually were like it'd be like in the United States bureaucracy. My dad was a part of that bureaucracy. He was a level 12 or level 13, I think, when he retired. If you achieved that level in Russia, theirs went backwards. So it was from 14 down to 1. They had just the opposite as far as ours, as far as how it was ranked. If you achieved a certain level, a certain rank, by the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, that rank was a rank of 4. You then automatically were granted inherited title. So you were granted into the royal world. So what you actually have is that Lenin's father got that title. He achieved the level of 4th rank in the Department of Education, giving him, and it's not very many families made that journey. It wasn't very easy to make it up to that rank, but his father made it up to that rank, giving him he was the first inherited title holder in his family line. Okay, that was Lenin. He then created a revolution to just eliminate that gap. So the Chinese and the Russian revolutions were more tinkering with this centuries and centuries old merit-based family ranking system of the Table of Ranks. So it wasn't this overwhelming, complete throwout of every revolution of everything that they had done previously.
It's an equalizer.
It was an equalizer, allowing the merit to trump any inherited title. So merit became king, where it used to be kind of a combination of merit and title. They just threw out the title holder and allowed it to be completely merit. Of course, their royal family still dominated the upper tiers of the ranks. So they had a revolution allowing the entire society to become involved in this. So they have a ranking system. That at the very top of this ranking system is still the High Council of the Slavic world. That High Council still coordinates with the rest of the world.
So Putin has. So is there a royal family of Russia? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah,
and
Putin actually already recalled the Romanovs. So Putin let out a message already that he is now officially recalling the royal families of Russia back to Russia.
Oh, yes? He did?
Yeah. So
where are they? Where are the royal? I know that Tsar was killed, obviously, or is he? Then he's.
There's thousands of them.
Thousands of them. Where are they?
There's a significant population in Europe and a significant population in the United States. They have their own website. You can actually go to it.
Why are they being recalled to Russia?
RussianNobility.org. Well, because they're reestablishing this the hierarchy. So they are gearing up for World War III. I mean, that they're obviously gearing up for a massive conflict with the democratic process.
Let's not freak people out too much yet. We might get there in a future episode.
yeah.
But
enjoy your lunch.
It's not really funny. It's not really funny, but there you go. But basically, you're saying is there are monarchies' existence in Russia, and that's why there might be a connection between. There's this recent scandal in the UK where Prince Michael, who's the cousin of the Queen's, was caught by the. Sorry, go ahead.
No, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's Ella's dad, Prince Michael.
That's Ella. That's Ella's dad. Oh, well, there you go. So Ella's dad happens to be the guy who was caught in a Zoom call trying to sell his influence with Putin, saying, for $250,000, I'll introduce the South Korean mining company to Putin. And, this is the first time, as I can recall, that there's been a overt sort of recording of somebody in the royal family selling their influence to a foreign country or a foreign company in order to connect them with someone who's supposedly the enemy of the UK. I mean, just like America, Russia is considered the number one national security threat to the UK. And so here's the Queen's cousin introducing a South Korean company to Putin, or offering to, for $250,000. Now, it just struck me, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on tonight, is how does that even happen? It could only happen if there's some sort of pre-existing sort of peerage network where, everybody knew each other, so knew that they could open the door to Putin.
Oh, of course. I mean, Catherine the Great was German. A lot of people don't even know that or realize the extensive interfamily relationships that cross international boundaries here. The royals are played by a completely different set of rules. If you look throughout the history of the 20th century, there's not very many books on this subject because academia has stayed largely away, largely because of the fact that the entire Ivy League is founded and still run by European royalty. So they make sure they stay away from this. But a few academics have done books on the subject. You could buy a book called The Royalty and the Reich, or Hitler's Go-Betweens, and you start to broach into this concept of the true extent of royalty's involvement in world affairs. And what you find is that they have their fingerprints on absolutely everything. I mean, this guy just happened to be caught in a Zoom call. You have thousands of members of European royalty that have international ability to beyond what an ambassador would. I mean, immunities of all kind of local laws. They can go anywhere and do things that
a lot of them are immune, right? I mean, the Prince Charles cannot commit a crime that could be arrested for. Neither can the Queen. I mean, I think the extended family can if it's a civil crime. If it's a criminal crime, but on a civil basis, they can't even be sued either. But there's, these guys have impunity. They can do whatever they want around the world. And they do, basically. I mean, they can get away with anything. Yeah. Look at Andrew.
Exactly. Yeah. You just took the words out.
Sorry, but go ahead. So let's talk about Andrew.
No, I was saying, look at Andrew. And Trump pretended like he'd never met Andrew when they asked Trump about Andrew. And he had a meeting with Andrew on that first trip to London. On his first royal visit.
Oh, really? I didn't know
he
that.
had a private breakfast with Prince Andrew because obviously they were running buddies with Jeffrey Epstein,
Well,
and Trump tried to keep that off the schedule. It wasn't publicized.
Not only when you say running buddies, they traded arms all the way back to Iran-Contra and the
Khashoggi.
The Khashoggi worked for all of them to trade those arms, and that's how we got to the Iran-Contra scandal, and possibly why we're so why we know so much today about this contrast with the royal family's public face and their private face. But they can do anything, and they do a lot of things that are against the law. And in Andrew's case, it was trading weapons, lots of them.
Oh yeah, the royal family operates, and they've openly stated this, but a lot of people don't understand the extent of it. They operate like a duck. They are almost entirely serene above water, but underneath the surface, they are just paddling and paddling. I mean, what Charles, you look at the gravity by which the world media is talking about the ascendancy of Charles. And yet, like I told you in a previous conversation, there's this really quite disconnect between the gravity by which they cover the royals and every single move that they make, almost like the announcer of the golf tournaments at like the Masters. I mean, it's just this low and hushed tones, like Prince Charles is walking up to the microphone. Every single step, every ounce of their lives is covered with such gravity. And then the gap is, what are they really doing? Then they pivot to this. They're not doing anything. It's all just interpersonal, very sort of tabloid. Well, he wants his sons to get along. I mean, no, that has nothing. They are operating like a duck underneath the water, underneath the surface. Prince Charles and Queen Elizabeth, and Prince Charles now, is at the helm of a vast network of the most powerful people and families in Europe. And what he does is he controls their lives within this network. He has total sovereign control within the British Empire, within the Commonwealth, over how these royal families rise and fall within the only network of power that matters in Europe. And that wields extraordinary power. He doesn't have to have direct power over the parliament.
And
he has
he
power
actually stands
over
for
them.
something. He stands for something. He wrote this book called Harmony, which apparently is not a great book. However, let me pull up the cover here so you can see it. The Prince of Wales Harmony, a new way of looking at our world is what he's called it. Let me just make sure we can all have our microphones on. So in this book, he basically starts talking about his pet thing, which is climate change, and how he believes that sustainable development is the way for the world to go. Now, as it turns out, the world is actually undergoing this transformation of sustainable development. And he wrote this book many, many years ago. And it does seem like his vision of how the world should operate economically is actually beginning to see its way into reality. In Canada, maybe it's more pronounced than it is in the United States, but this idea of sustainable economies is a very big deal. And he goes on to list, he's got this Magna Carta of, I guess there's a Magna Carta of that exists before, but he's created this Terra Carta, which is, how the climate and the economy should work together, and he lists all these things. Nature's value must be included in economics. The environment is an international challenge. 3/2 of the planet must be protected by 2050, and investment must support low carbon. I guess that's just a summary of it. But there's a sense from him that he really wants to change the world, and people just think of him as this sort of dry, not necessarily very interesting guy. But he's also been very involved in changing government policy in the United Kingdom. Up until recently, we hadn't seen the Spider memos, but these have now started coming out. And these are memos where he has for decades been talking to ministers in the UK government, demanding certain policy take hold. So the king is not meant to be involved in government policy, but there in the UK, in these Spider memos, he's directing these ministers to do specific things. And I know we're running out of time, and we probably will have things to do, but I want to play one clip. Could I do this one clip for 2 minutes? It's going to be, do you have time? No, maybe running out of time. We'll do it next time. But there is a really interesting clip where they show how fixed he is about changing the world by restoring a previous version of the world to the world. He wants to make us go back in time to a different era. He's built this village in the UK where it's like an old village. It looks like an old village, but inside of all, it's very modern. But on the outside of it, the facades are all very, very traditional architecture. The economies are very self-sustaining. This is his vision for the world, and it's very contrary to the push that capitalism has had for many, many centuries. And so I'm interested in hearing your points of view, David, about, is this change in the economy Charles's influence? Is he actually influencing some of this? Are we seeing the shift in the world's value because of that?
He's making here a direct appeal to the hunting and gathering lifestyle. This is a direct appeal to their ancestors. They know exactly where they come from. They've had this problem with the agricultural world from its outset. They've always believed, the nomadic network and the Central Council has always believed that agriculture has an inherent flaw built into it. And so what he's doing there is a direct appeal to the international network of royals. They know that they come from the hunting and gathering world, and he's making a manifesto for a future that is vastly different than the one that we currently live in.
Wow.
And it's also... Okay, you want to leave it there?
We can keep going. I can talk for hours, but we can also do another show.
Yeah, okay. And the world that he's describing is also vastly less populated.
Vastly less populated, vastly less democratic, it seems, and vastly less capitalist in their approach. Like, we're talking about a feudal system, really.
No doubt about it.
Like a
they want their world back.
System. Yeah, well, that's a hell of a note. Noel, any thoughts from you before you say goodnight?
That's fascinating. That ties in with the Koch brothers too, and what the kind of the political movements in this country moving it towards more of a feudal system. So saying they want their world back is chilling, and you can see the imprint of that in the way things have been moving. But I'll leave it there. We should do another show sometime. Thanks, David. That was fascinating.
Yeah, really interesting time, David. Thanks for being on the show. I'm going to play out with that clip from, I guess it's a BBC documentary. It's 2 minutes about Charles's point of view, but there's a lot to take in here. And as last time I spoke to you, David, I think it took me months to actually process a lot of what you were saying, because it seems so daunting to to the first time you listen to it. It's so overwhelming to think that there's a whole system of work out there that is running the world that we're not aware of. However, once you get through that initial shock, it is good to know what's on the other side. I mean, at the end of the day, I'd rather know exactly what we're dealing with than just guessing. And I think you've been able to give us some of the boundaries of what that looks like, and hopefully we'll come back on the show again and we'll go into it in more detail. So thanks very much for joining us tonight, David.
Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure.
We'll see you again
awesome,
soon.
David.
Thanks, Noel. Thanks, David. And here's
Thanks.
this documentary about Prince Charles that I was talking about to play us out. Here we go.
These barracks were due to be transformed, but in June last year, the planning application was dropped. The court heard how Prince Charles had written to the Qatar royal family and their development company, asking them to reconsider the plans, even submitting some new ones with an architect that he preferred.
After growing up in an atmosphere of servile flattery, Charles considers himself to be one of the world's great thinkers.
All of his ideas on architectural design, class structure, aesthetics, and ecology are here. And what he sees as the future looks very much like the past. An 18th century village adapted for the 21st.
And that's a convenience store, which I'm very proud of, which everybody said wouldn't work. That's the pub, which again, nobody wanted to touch. But now, of course, the values are going up and up and up.
The problem is not the type of interventions that he makes, it's the fact that he makes them. What if we discovered that he was incredibly keen on the death penalty, or he wanted to recriminalise homosexuality?
It is absolutely fine, essential even, to defend the Tibetan Buddhist and the Syrian Christian. But the people he does defend are always believers in traditional faith. And one notices that that can be combined with the most lush and lavish and friendly relationships with the most powerful and reactionary monarchies in the world.
He will very happily go to Saudi Arabia, and he took part in a ceremony with the then Crown Prince, and they dressed up in Bedouin robes and they took part in a little sword dance. What seemed to me extraordinary about that was that what swords are usually used for in Saudi Arabia is cutting people's heads off, and that seemed to me the most extraordinary bad taste.
Narrative is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.